I'm not sleeping. Like, I'm awake all night. My heart's racing. And they're like, oh, did you try not drinking coffee in the evening? And it was just like getting punched in the stomach. Just like, it's like being on fire. And they're like, did you try not pouring gasoline on yourself? You just like, nobody understands it, including who you hope would understand it, which is the doctor. Brains are like an email inbox. And, like for my email inbox on my computer, you get your useful information, and then there's this spam. You always get spam. That's like Nigerian prince wants money, or your Netflix subscription is like, send us your credit card. And you're like, that's a bunch of junk. Like, filter that away. But the exact same mechanism happens in our brain, useful thought, spam. And you get the like, oh, I should send that prince some money. And like, I should like send my credit, right? Like we don't do what we do with our inbox on our computer. We don't do it in our brains. We go into that spam. We go into that story. Spam is not going to stop. It's going to keep coming, but I can filter it and I can say, you can be here.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another really special Talking Insomnia episode. We have Brady with us. Welcome.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Daniel. Super excited to be here.
Super excited to get talking with you. And for the first time ever, actually, we're going to have, a second section of this interview where you're going to ask me some questions. So we're going to have some discussion. And that kind of ties into how this episode happened. I sent out one of my newsletters. You replied to it, and you had some kind of really nice and insightful questions for me. And then I was like, hey, why don't we do a podcast around this? And you said yes. So I'm so happy about that. But let's start with your journey. So how did you start having trouble sleeping?
Sure. And interesting you brought up the Kirsten's email. I'll start with that, maybe, that it resonated so strongly that I feel like I could have just dropped my name into that story and it would have been mine. And so that'll be one of my questions. This is sort of like how incredibly standard, which isn't the right word, but this sort of template that it kind of seems to follow. And I want to talk about the value of that, or what that looks like. But anyways, my story begins last year, August 26th. I remember the day. So that's 7 months ago. And I, didn't sleep one night. And I think what was the hardest, and this will be another question actually, but what was the hardest is I didn't know why. I like other success stories are like, I had this big game tournament coming up, had a job interview, so I just didn't sleep, and that sort of got the ball rolling. But for me, it was like, why did that happen? I have no idea. And I was grasping, trying to find, like, maybe it was because of something in a meeting last week, or there was wildfires last year, I believe. And that sort of, I'm sort of have like climate anxiety. So like, oh yeah, that's gotta be it. I wanted to like I think the brain wants to like find something to latch onto, an anchor on. But the fact I didn't really have anything, it kind of made it worse. So yeah, I didn't sleep, and then like that was weird. And I actually slept okay for another week, and then it happened again, and that's when the sort of rabbit hole began. And I think that's quite common. So it was like I woke up my wife, and by the way, I have a wife and two kids, two young kids. So I woke up my wife, like, should I go to the ER? Like they need to like anesthetize me so I sleep or I'm gonna die, like standard stuff. Luckily my wife is a nurse and all her friends are doctors and nurses, and I called one of our doctor friends, and she's like, don't go to the emergency room, that's the like terrible place for you to go, like you're gonna be okay. I was like, okay. And then sort of that just started the whole like standard, go on Google, Dr. Google, Reddit, Insomnia, which I think a lot of people land on for better or for worse, and it tells you the standard stuff, sleep hygiene. Reddit is kind of a funny place because people say like, I'm not sleeping, I've tried everything. I tried not drinking 3 cups of coffee, and I took these pills, and like, I've tried everything. That's everything. Like, oh, that is not everything. And then I think I finally landed on Google, like all the conditions, like, is it my heart? And I finally like, oh, thyroid, this is it. I'm reading through like the hyperthyroidism, like, yes, this makes sense. Must be my thyroid. So, okay, this has to be it. So I go to the doctor, and this will be another question about doctors and physicians in Western medicine, but I've heard this story many times. Like, I told them, I think it's my thyroid, and they're like, oh, maybe, sure, let's get your thyroid checked. So we did the thyroid blood work. They gave me trazodone and amitriptyline. I tried those, and yeah, for the record, I tried those like 1 or 2 nights, and they worked once, I think, and then just like horrible, felt like a zombie. And luckily, I was like, nope, this is. I think I think it was Joseph Panel's videos that I finally landed on that. Like, no, this stuff is no good. It has no good pathways. So luckily, I got off that quick, and I'm gonna do this thing naturally, whatever that is. The other thing with the doctor was like, yeah, I'm not sleeping. Like, I'm awake all night. My heart's racing, and they're like, "Oh, did you try not drinking coffee in the evening?" And it was just like getting punched in the stomach. Just like, it's like being on fire. And they're like, "Did you try not pouring gasoline on yourself?" Like, what? That's like not what you want to hear. So like a lot of other stories, you just like, nobody understands it, including who you hope would understand it, which is the doctor. So yeah, I stopped I got super scared of blue light, avoided blue light, got those glasses, stopped coffee.
Sorry
Yeah.
to jump in here, Brady, but
Please,
like two quick questions. Just firstly, timeline from that first night that you sort of for some reason didn't sleep, and until kind of where we are now. How much time has elapsed?
To this point, yeah, I'd say within a month, I had sort of, I guess I'm sort of a, what's the word, like, high achiever, like try to fix everything, engineer work. Like, so I dove in head first, and I think I found some good resources relatively quickly. So yeah, this is like a month. I'd say of my whole journey, like 2 months was like the dark period of real struggle. So this is like a month in, and I remember I downloaded the CBT-I coach app, which was like the big one by like the veterans, US veterans or something. And I think I remember it asking me like, how many months or years have you had insomnia? I was like, months or years? Like, and then weeks. Like, is this thing gonna be months? Or don't I even qualify to like get help if I haven't had this thing for months? There's just so many repetitive like punches in the gut that like really hurt. So the other one with that app, which I wish I wrote them, was you track your sleep. We'll get into CBT-I, but you track your sleep. And if you put less than 5 hours sleep, it would put a warning on saying like, warning, like less than 5 hours sleep is really bad for you. Like, seek help. I was like, this is what the app is for.
Right.
Yeah. And so every time it was like these little like dings that something is kind of wrong with you. So yeah. And anyways, the ashwagandha and the valerian root, everyone's tried these things, and I have a big pile of them now in my closet somewhere. But maybe let's see.
Yeah, no, I think you painting a picture really nicely, helpfully, and just one question that I'm sure people in the audience have. I was like, during these 2 months, what were the nights like? Was it kind of very choppy sleep, or is it kind of some completely sleepless nights? What was it like?
Yeah, I'd say I don't think I ever had like a sleepless night. And I think there are those nights where you're like, oh, I didn't sleep, but you actually did, like the micro sleep and things. I like consider myself lucky that I think I slept like 1 to 3 hours. That was like a bad night. That usually like 3 to 5, I would sort of have this light sleep. And then the sort of longer stretch was sort of this 4 to 6 hours where it took me a long time to fall asleep. And both the like sleep, what do you call it? Inducing sleep. Yeah. And then the maintenance. Yeah. I had both of those, sort of the Swiss cheese for like a good long while. And I never really had like multiple nights like sleepless, which I think some people have, but just like a couple hours kind of thing. And then this sort of yo-yoing for a while.
And how about your days? Were you, I'm sure they were consumed by thinking about this and kind of problem solving, but were you still able to work, and how were you functioning during the day?
Yeah, the first couple months was tough. Yeah, I definitely have a job that I really like. I like my job, but it's a lot of work, and I value being like productive and showing up and people pleasing, meeting deadlines. And I think, yeah, you know this, but like the suffering and the pain comes from, you want to be here and you're performing here. And that gap is the suffering that I'm not where I want to be. And, you learn that the spectrum that, I can be 60% today, that came with time, but that's where it really hurt. And my kids, like having kids, I want to be a good dad. I want to be a good husband, a lot of obligations in my life at this point. And when you just can't perform at that level, that's where the panic starts. and yeah, lots of panic. The one thing I will give my doctors, they gave me Ativan as well. That was like the parachute or like the emergency chute for some of these really, really tough days. But I think one of the hardest decisions was with work. That do I like take time off work and figure this out, and then I have all day just sitting in my house ruminating about sleep, or do I persevere and just like accept I'm a kind of not as good employee and push through? And I took a week off, I think, and then my wife, bless her, kind of like pushed me along, like, no, keep working, like keep your mind busy. And I had a great counselor at the time. Like, yeah, keep going and accept your 50%. Like there's a lot of people that work at 50% all the time. And yeah, that was a really tough time, like just getting my kid, but also like having to get my kids to daycare and like keep going and having to take care of kids. The kids, you can't press pause on kids. I think as painful as it was, that helped. And that was part of the experimentation that, I remember one day riding my bike to work and just crying and like, how am I going to do this day at these big meetings? And then I got to the meeting room and I just like kind of snapped out of it, and I felt pretty good. And that was like the first big jump in like, oh, I can still function with low sleep. And, I just watched a video yesterday about that sort of like person who doesn't have insomnia. Yeah, they're just sleepy the next day. But for me, it was like sleep and like every hyper arousal you can list. Like I had, I think I wrote them down here, like, yeah, jumpiness and feeling hot, heart palpitations, dry mouth at night, just like bathroom breaks galore. And all of those meant, like, I was jumping around a bit, but when I had those, it meant that I wasn't going to sleep, that I attributed all the hyper arousal to like, okay, I'm not going to sleep tonight, which we'll get to that as well, sort of accepting those feelings and that. Oh yeah, the other one was the other sort of arbitrary thing was that, like, if you go on the internet, you find this, it pops up first thing is like 3 month, the distinction between acute and chronic insomnia. It's this 3 months. And now I look back on this like silly arbitrary, like 3 months, like what is that? Doesn't mean anything. But at the time I was counting the days, like 3 months is coming up. I gotta like get over this thing because I don't want to have chronic anxiety. I just had this acute thing. I wish that would sort of go away. I don't know if you have thoughts about that sort of arbitrary.
Yeah, not much more than that. It is completely arbitrary. Somebody just decided that 3 months is going to be the length of time that distinguishes acute versus chronic. And if you talk to somebody who started having insomnia, had insomnia for 2 months, or you talk with somebody who's had struggled with insomnia for like 15 years, it is the exact same, like the same thought patterns, the same behaviors, the same ideas, the same fears. There's nothing different. So I think the whole acute chronic, it doesn't really help at all. It just leads to that experience you had, which is somebody's like, oh no, it can't be more than 3 months. And then the pressure to sleep well before the 3 months timeline is up makes you have trouble sleeping. So you kind of, if anything, go past that, right? And then you think, oh no, now I went past this. Now, I have to do a bunch of things so it doesn't become like even worse. So yeah, long story short, I think it is completely arbitrary and it's not really helpful at all.
I don't know if this is the right moment to talk about it, but yeah, like, how do we fix this? How do we get your information to avoid that sort of fumbling around in the dark? Or is it part of the journey to sort of go through this, like taking your ashwagandha route and figuring out that these things don't work, and that experience of fumbling around in the dark with this like bad information? Like if I had found your content right away, would that be better? Or I don't know.
I think those are great questions. And I would say this, that the sort of fumbling around and trying things to experience that nothing kind of externally actually leads where you want to be, I think to some degree probably always is going to be part of the journey, because our brain is this like survival machine. It's a problem solving machine. If you tell it when it's kind of in the middle of like a panicky state that you don't need to do anything, there's nothing needed, it's very hard for it to accept that. when it's
Totally.
gone through a couple of iterations of like, I've tried this, didn't work, I've tried this, didn't work, I tried this, didn't work, then it eventually goes to place like, okay, maybe I don't need to do anything. Maybe all my trying to do stuff is actually part of the problem. So I think part of that experimenting is part of the journey. It's part of the learning process for sure. But you have people who, again, never come across any like sound teaching or sound information that stay in that loop for months and years. And that, of course, is not a nice place to be in at all. And it's very, very unfortunate, which leads to kind of the first part of your question, which was how do we get a different approach out there in the mainstream to kind of in the traditional practices and mental health professionals and physicians and the health space overall. I think this is a huge question, and it's one that I've pondered a lot. And I think of it this way, that medicine is born out of kind of the scientific approach, if you will, which has been extremely helpful in so many aspects of like, human endeavors and the advancement of like, where we are as a species, if you will. But then when we apply how we approach, let's say, a femur fracture to how we approach like feeling depressed or feeling anxious, it doesn't yield the same results. It's not like there isn't like a specific pathological problem in the brain that we need this medication to fix, right? It isn't like that approach just doesn't work anymore, right? But still to this day, I think doctors are basically taught that depression is caused by this transmitter deficiency, and we can remediate it with this medicine pill, right? So to change that is something really, really radical. Like you have to do one of two things, I think. One is to kind of completely separate, let's say, medicine from let's for now call it a psychological approach, and say that doctors are taught that, okay, this is not within medicine. This is not a clear-cut pathological process that needs an intervention. It's straightforward intervention. This is something else. Okay, I'm going to refer you out. Or you had to have like physicians, nurses, and everybody healthcare have to basically become sort of like more holistic, more like healers, like learn this like inner journey things and become that
big
person.
Step.
That's a huge
It's
step.
a big ask.
Right?
Yeah.
Imagine
having doctor friends. Yeah.
Imagine them, like you see, like typically if you work outpatient, you see like maybe 15, 20, 25 patients a day. And it's just impossible to see how that doctor could be like, oh, you struggle with insomnia? Okay, let's start from the very beginning. Right? That initial conversation is like an hour, right?
Even how they're paid, their pay structure is, kind of volume based, which is a little crazy. It's just the whole structure is not set up for that kind of care.
100%.
And that's not to diminish, like we have doctor friends. I'm like in awe of what their knowledge and the things they do and what they provide to society. But this gap, and it applies to depression and anxiety. And you see all these patterns and similarities from sleep is sort of this like gateway into all like the whole mental health realm where, yeah, like one of my physiological things was breathing. I had this like weird knot in my lungs, it felt like, and I told the doctor, and they're like, oh, it's probably asthma. Like, here's an inhaler. And it turned out, long story short, to be I've had it for months and years, actually, one of the first alarm bells of like kind of that hyper arousal that I had no idea that it was anxiety. And through the sleep insomnia recovery, just being like, what if this is just anxiety? And it was almost like instant that it kind of went away. It was incredible. And just thinking back, like, they just can't. How many people are just getting inhalers? It's like it's really like sad to think about people out there struggling unnecessarily. But I don't know.
100%. And just to kind of like to finish my thoughts on this topic is I just don't see the traditional system making this huge switch, if you will. So what I think will happen is that you will have sort of like an alternative space emerge where there are like peer-to-peer support, coaches, the type of work that we're doing. I think slowly but surely will grow and become an alternative to kind of the traditional space. I see it more that way.
Agreed. Yeah, kind of like the natural path diet to the dietitian, sort of like, let's think holistically about, let's start over. What's your diet? Like as a kid, I had bad acne and the doctor prescribed some like terrible drug like to treat acne, but nobody asked like the fact I was drinking multiple cups of like soda a day, and like my diet was horrible, and all these, and maybe that wasn't the magic solution, but nobody asked about that. And I think that's starting to emerge as dietitians and or naturopaths. So that same thing, and I'm infinitely grateful for the work you and the coaches do that are filling that gap, and seeing these stories of like, it wasn't until I found your stuff that this all kind of came together. So I hope that like sleep coach becomes a thing. And sorry, I have a lot to say, but like it was funny. I really wanted to talk to Alina at one point in time, and I was happy to pay. I spoke to Joseph Panel. Is he one of your coaches, Joseph?
Yeah, he's actually one of our graduates. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, he's great. I spoke to him twice, but I asked my benefits provider from work, like, can you cover this thing? This is so incredibly helpful to my health to talk to these sleep coaches. Can you cover it? And they're like, yeah, the sleep coach is not a thing we can cover. Like, that's like helping me so much, and I can go see like all these, like I can get orthotics, but I can't get help sleeping. So I hope as it grows, it becomes more mainstream. Yeah. Thanks for that.
I absolutely. And I was going to say, going back to sort of you and your story now, there was an interesting thing you said, which was that you felt like you thought maybe you had some nodule, something in your lungs that's been there bothering you to some degree for years, right?
Kind of came on and off, yeah.
On and off, right? And then when you realized this is probably just an anxiety thing, and then it really just started to fade. To me, what was interesting to me was that, okay, that means that there was some degree of like anxiety there in the background that had been there for quite a long time, which probably plays into that initial sleepless night in my mind, So it maybe there wasn't one specific thing that happened, but maybe there was some kind of anxiety in the background that may have played a role in that. So it's kind of, now it becomes a little less mysterious to me.
I think that's the answer. It's sort of the bucket that fills up and then overflows, and your body sort of raises the bells louder and louder. And we'll get to like gratitude about this journey, that I can recognize those now instead of just letting them, sort of have no explanation for them. Yeah.
Now this is turning into a very, interesting episode, because when you sort of had a question for me, I thought this was a perfect timing, because we've left your journey in sort of like almost like a cliffhanger aspect, where you told us about how difficult it was. And so I thought like maybe now we go to either whatever is next step for you in your story. Let's go there.
Yeah. Okay. As I said, I'm an engineer, so I actually like wrote my notes in like phases. So we're on to phase 2 now, which is like the sort of education recovery. So I tried CBT-I, and yet another annoying arbitrary thing that they say when you look up CBT-I is it says works for 80% of people. Like 80%. Like, of course, the anxious brain is going to be like, I'm in the 20% for sure. And it's like so unhelpful. You can say that about any tool, 80%. So all these things need to get fixed. But I tried it. Well, at first I latched onto it really hard. Like, this is it. Like, it's the no medication solution. Perfect. Like, it's very structured. That's totally me. I like told my wife, yes, I got it. This thing is going to help me. It's like all the physicians, US physicians say it's the best thing. And then I tried it one night, and it was like so stressful, because they use words. What is it? Stimulus control, sleep restriction. You don't want to hear the word sleep like intentionally sleep less. And I understand the mechanisms now, but like at the time, just so unhelpful. And I was like, but I thought that was the only thing.
And you did it like through that app, or?
Yeah, I kind of did it DIY, because the app, like I said, stressed me out because it kept giving me that warning.
Okay.
So I was like, I think I stumbled across the sleep window, and that set better with me. But I tracked it. I did when I woke up. Like, did the whole analysis. Okay, I probably went to bed 11. I woke up. Okay, 5 hours. Again, in hindsight, like, just not a good practice. Though maybe it's good in the time. Like I think you said it. Different tools for different times in the journey. So what seems ludicrous now maybe was the right thing at the time. But anyways, CBT-I I kind of put to the side, but I didn't know what was next, and I kept searching, and I luckily stumbled across a audiobook called Insomnia. His name's
Oh
Ivo.
yeah.
I don't know if you know it, but
I know him. Yeah.
oh, good, yeah. Yeah, there's some other stuff. Anyways, I did talk with Ivo as well, but the book I found very helpful just because it introduced, I'll say two things. Was, well, the tagline was like, solve insomnia without pills and CBT-I and sleep hygiene. Like, okay, great, this sounds good. And it introduced acceptance therapy and all this sort of like dropping the rope, like very useful skills. And it had, at the end, it had these phases. It kind of quantified recovery into these 8 phases, and it really worked well for me. So phase 1 is like you're lost in the dark, and phase 4 is like you're sleeping better but your anxiety's high. Phase 5, speed bumps. 6, 7, 8 are sort of, like the last road to recovery. Letting go, non-attachment. To me, that was really helpful to have these phases, because I could see, like, okay, I made it to phase 5 or step 5. Like I could see progress. Like, I'm done step 1 to 4. I've left the dark, and I only have these 3 steps to go. And maybe I'll ask you, like, as I mentioned in the beginning with Kirsten, and I just watched Christian's success story yesterday. I can almost like guess in the YouTube, like I can almost like click on different parts in the YouTube video to be like, I bet this is the point where he like finds acceptance. I bet this is the point where it does really seem standardized. And I wonder, as you've had so many success story talks, are these phases real? Do you see them fit into this bucket? And is that a helpful way to structure recovery? Or is that not helpful? Everyone's unique, everyone's individual, or is it really this like standard template?
Yeah. Very, very nice question. And I would say, firstly, that having done, more than 100, I think maybe close to 150, like interviews like this one, and in addition to that, like, coached hundreds, maybe more than 1,000 people, I can say, the journey, like how people get into insomnia, say develop insomnia, is very, very predictable and standard, and it's like the same story all over again. And how people leave insomnia is also very, very much the same. Like, it's very similar. So overall, it is, it is something that is very similar for everyone. And one of the benefits with that is that you can actually create, programs, or write a book, or create a course that really like that people can really feel like, oh my gosh, like this is me. Like I recognize this, I understand this, right? So in one way, so I say that I think that's when you understand that, you can really provide services that are really helpful. Now, in terms of like dividing, let's say the let's say the recovery journey up into different stages and describing them, is that helpful? I think it is helpful, because of kind of what you alluded to, which is the recognition that you can read about a stage and you can be like, oh yeah, this is where I'm at, and you can find yourself a little bit later. You can be like, okay, now I'm here. Okay, so I see some progression here. So I think overall, I think it is helpful, and I think it is real. I think there are different stages, different phases. Now, the tricky part becomes when you do what I did in the beginning, which was, I said, okay, this stage usually lasts this many weeks, and this one this many weeks, and stuff like that. And that was just based on kind of my intuition. And for many people, it was like that. But then for other people, it just created pressure. So I took out that whole time element, and now I just describe these phases, and I'm always like, it takes a little bit different for all the people. So that's how I think of it.
That makes a lot of sense. Alina had a video where she said, all brains are roughly the same. They kind of operate the same. And I'm like, no, I'm unique. And now I'm like, yeah, it's just the same. But timelines are interesting. I had a note in my journal. I sort of kept a journal of my sleep and everything, looking back like 4 months ago. And I wrote life after insomnia and thinking like, oh, I did it. I've had like 3 nights of good sleep. I did it. And here we are 4 months later, and I'm still having speed bumps, and still like going to bed and feeling nervous and things. So the timeline thing, I completely accepted that, like, there's no value in having a timeline. Yeah.
And in many ways, just a quick add-on to that, there in many ways there isn't a timeline, because like let's say
No.
call it like the recovery journey is about like education and self-expression and understanding things. And once you've left the sleep struggle, right, when you no longer really have any speed bumps, the journey sort of continues, because this has opened your eyes to something that you
Yeah.
cannot unsee, So now it becomes more like, part of your life becomes like paying attention to your own thoughts, your own feelings and emotions, and think of these things. So it becomes like a lifelong journey, really.
So yeah, it's a great way to say it. There is no like finish line, like I'm done. I'm a new person now. It's incredible. I would like to switch to a topic, which is again back to medication, but this is anxiety medication. So I want to bring it up because it was a big sort of topic for me, and I haven't seen many people dive into it deeply in the success stories. Maybe they have, and I haven't seen it. But anyways, my doctor and my friend doctor was like, Brady, you're so anxious. Like, that's why you're not sleeping. It's anxiety. SSRI is your answer. It's going to help you out. And I wrestled with it so long. Like, I never thought I was that anxious of a person. I didn't feel I wanted a medication before all the sleep stuff. I don't want to be someone who's medicated unnecessarily. I've prided myself all my life to be like healthy, and like you fill out those like sheets and like medications. Nope. So I really wrestled with it, but anyway, I ended up going on it. Long story short, it's Zoloft, sertraline, I think it's called, your standard anti-anxiety med. I went up to 100 milligrams. I think 25 is the minimum dose. Getting on it was hard. Like, I couldn't tell what was the insomnia stress and what was the Zoloft stress, but the first week I was like, I don't think I can do this. It was the worst time of the whole experience. I'm like, okay, I got to push through. This thing's going to help me. And I don't know if it helped. I can say at the end, maybe it did, and I owe it more than I'm giving it. It's hard to parse out the education and the medication, but at its full strength, a lot of side effects, not debilitating or anything, but like really hot and really intrusive, weird thoughts I've never had before. Just like darkness in the head that was really strange. So pretty uncomfortable, but I accepted that maybe it was helping me. And then now I'm actually weaning off it. I'm back on 25 milligrams. And no one tells you going off this stuff is not really fun either. That weaning off it. Nobody tells you about getting off this stuff. So that's been a bit of a road bump as well. But I wanted to ask you, is there value in it? Is it a tool? And of course, you're not a physician, and this is not medical advice. But is it a red herring? Are we treating the wrong thing? I still don't know. That whole topic, anti-anxiety for sleep.
Yeah. Wow, there's so many things you mentioned that I was like, oh, we could talk about this, you could talk about that.
Yeah.
But overall, I think of it this way, that anxiety is an emotion, right? And there is something called like the cognitive model, and it's within coaching, it's used as well, like the life coach school, which is run by someone named Brooke Castillo. She calls it like the self-coaching model, but it's basically the same thing. That it says that there are circumstances which are just like things that happen in life that we have no control over, right? And then we can think certain ways about those circumstances. Those are our thoughts, and thoughts give rise to emotions. However we feel is always based on a thought. If I tell you, like, think about a teddy bear, you probably feel a little bit of a fuzzy feeling, because that's a nice thing. If say, think about a werewolf, you're like a little anxious, right? But it's like very silly proof of concept that like our emotions comes from our thoughts, and thoughts then give rise to actions or non-action or whatnot. But that's kind of the model of how the brain works, which I believe in, and I think that's one place where I think I agree with standard psychology and much of coaching, like that model of like how kind of the brain it works. Now, what that teaches us is that, again, like our feelings really come from our thoughts. So if we are feeling anxious, that probably means we're thinking to some degree that something's wrong, where there's some threat, something isn't right, and that then makes us feel anxious. Which it's supposed to do that, because thinking that there's some threat is supposed to make us anxious. So we take action, and we escape whatever we think is dangerous to us. Now, my point here is that I don't think any medication can really kind of go into our brain and change our thoughts, change how we think about things, So I don't really think they have any real significant impact on our emotions in themselves, like the chemicals in themselves. I don't really think have big impact. And now, if you think about something like a benzodiazepine or antipsychotic, they can be quite sedating. They can have quite strong sedating properties. But sedation and peace of mind are completely different things.
Yeah.
And so somebody can take a very strong, potent benzodiazepine and start feel sedated, and then think, oh, this will take care of my anxiety for me. Now I don't have to do anything further, and actually then have that peace of mind, which doesn't come from the benzodiazepine, but comes from how they think about the feeling of sedation,
Right.
And on the opposite, you can have somebody who takes the same medication and starts feeling sedated, and they have what we call relaxation anxiety. That's somebody who starts feeling the sedation effect and then thinks, oh my gosh, I hope this works. This better work, or else I'm screwed. And then they have the same sedation, but feel more anxious because of how they think about the sedation, right? So I think, it's really all about how we think about things that matter. The kind of chemicals don't really matter. Now, with that said, will I say, like, to anyone, like, don't take medications? Like, not at all. It's like so many people have told me, like, I took this medication for a while, and I think it was really nice for me at that time. And then I'm like, that's nice. I'm happy. That's great. But I think it is still helpful to know that what really matters isn't kind of the chemicals. It's always how we think about things. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, great way to put it. I think I wrestled with that a long time. Is it the sleep causing anxiety, or is the anxiety causing sleep? And what am I treating here? And we'll get into fear. And ultimately, the experiences of fear and treating a fear, and anxiety to me is kind of the fuel that fuels the fear. It's all very related, but I couldn't place, what I was treating with this. But if I went back, I think I would still take it. I think it was still, again, right tool for the right time. I think it was that experience I needed. But okay, thanks. That's really very wise, Daniel. Maybe on to.
And actually,
Yeah.
before you go into the next one, just very quickly, like you said, like when I started taking that medication, was kind of that was the worst maybe week of the whole thing. And to me, that tied so much into what you said before that, which was you're like, I always thought of myself as a healthy person, somebody who doesn't take medication. There was this big conflict, right? And now finally, you may have thought, I finally kind of gave up and
Totally. Yeah.
And I take this medication. Like, why am I taking medication? And you're
like a
like
failure. Yeah.
failure, exactly, right?
Failed. Yeah.
And then you feel like what you feel is actually not so much like, again, it's not the side effects from medication, it's how you think about yourself. And now you think about, like, I'm not going to make it. I failed. I shouldn't have done this. And that makes you feel really, really low. So again, how we think about medication, and a lot of the side effects that we feel can also be like not from the chemicals, but again, how we think about it. So yeah.
It was impossible to parse out what was doing what. And you're right. The thoughts are the most powerful drug of all. That I can think about nails on a chalkboard or giving a presentation, and I can feel getting sweaty. Like, I can create sensations in my body just by thinking. So it was hard to know what was doing it. And maybe Zoloft deserves more credit than I'm giving, but okay, thanks. If anyone out there listening, wants to talk about, having the same questions about SSRIs like I did, I'm happy to sort of talk or answer questions in the comments, because I think it weighs on people. Maybe on to sort of like the next phase, which is kind of where I discovered, non-attachment and the NATO principles. Acceptance, self-kindness is sort of the three core principles. My sleep got better, but my anxiety ramped up. This is sort of the next phase where, I was sleeping better, but when you have a good sleep, you're just worried about the next night of sleep. So it's almost felt worse than I did just not sleeping. And I had a lot of intrusive thoughts during the day. I had a lot of guilt, like, who am I to say I'm suffering? I'm here. I am in my safe house, in my warm bed with my family, not sleeping, and people in like Gaza are like don't have food, and that really weighed on me. This sort of guilt of feeling suffering, and that sort of triggered like a lot of thoughts about like the weight of the world. Like, suddenly this is how my counselor said, is like, you're kind of on this like highway of life and everything was fine. Mental health, was not really on your radar. And suddenly you're on this bumpy road and you can't really see what's going on. And I was like, I just want to be back on the highway again. But maybe I don't. Maybe it's good to be on this bumpy road, and that's how you become a better, stronger, resilient person. But this bumpy road, I just felt like the world all of a sudden had this weight to it. Like the suffering. I kind of understood what suffering was. Or before you read the news and, oh, that must be hard in Ukraine or what have you. People going through treatment. But now I'm like, wow, that I can understand how that feels, and that weight lasted for quite a long time. Probably one of the biggest challenges for a while. So at that point, I had sort of gathered my arsenal of tools, lots of great acceptance tools out there. Dropping the rope, dropping the anchor was my favorite. I'm happy to talk about that one. Sort of thought records to record these things. A lot of these really did help, slowly but surely. And I'll say, and interrupt me anytime, I can get rambling, but sort of non-attachment, like the NATO principle to sleep, non-attachment to the outcomes. I had the epiphany that it's not just sleep. It's not the attachment to if I sleep bad or what the next day is. It's non-attachment to the fear and anxiety. And one of the biggest epiphanies I had was I traveled, which was big. I went on a ski trip and I had to sleep in a room with a bunch of people. That was just terrifying. I didn't have my white noise and all these, my comforts. And my anxiety, of course, ramped up as I got into bed. And I was like, nope. I could feel the muscle tension and everything. And usually I would react to that and sort of let it take me. But this time I was like, I'm tired of this. Like, you can just be here, anxiety. You can just be here. Like, whatever. You're not going to go away. So just like be here. And I'm just going to lay here. And as you know, like that, it sort of went away. Just like that breathing thing I talked about, it sort of faded. And that was huge for me, that, not attachment to, and this is, I love your word immunity. I think that's such a genius word to use. And immunity meaning like, it's not that all this hyper arousal and anxiety is gone. It's that, it can be here and I can still be fine. That was like the biggest light bulb. And so maybe a question, like the idea of immunity to sleep, it feels like it can apply to anxiety and maybe depression and things. Depressing thoughts can be here, and it doesn't mean they're gone, but I can be sort of immune to these things by, they can be here and I'm okay. Do you think that concept of immunity can be better applied broadly?
Hey, 100%. And to expand a little bit on that, I often say that as bizarre as it may sound, as odd as it may sound, like insomnia isn't about sleep. It is about fear and anxiety, And one thing I'm really developing and thinking a lot about, and I'm going to share more about, is how I think it's true that insomnia is like, it comes from that fear of not sleeping. That's how it starts, We have, like you have a night of not sleeping much, and then we go like, oh no, what happened? What's wrong? And that's like the fear of not sleeping that then can keep us awake, and we try more, and effort is included, and then we have trouble sleeping, and then that can become a loop of its own. But I think eventually something else happens, which is that you have this fear of not sleeping, and that it is going on for, let's say, a couple of days or weeks. And what you're now experiencing is how it feels to feel scared, to feel hyper-aroused, to feel anxious, right? And then what happens is that is so unpleasant that you don't want to feel that. So now it kind of merges from just like fear of not sleeping to fear of fear,
Yeah.
fear of feeling
I had that for so long. I still do. Yeah.
And so that just ties into what you said, that is, again, at the deeper layer, it's our fear of like how we feel, which is kind of, in depression, we can be like fear of feeling sad, like, or fear of feeling anxious, or that's at the deeper, that's what the struggle is really about. So when we're like non-attached to fear or anxiety, when we're like, I can feel scared, and that's okay, I don't have to react to that. That leads to that immunity, where like all humans, we will always feel scared or anxious or angry or whatever it is. But if we're not like reacting to that, then it will not be a struggle, and we have that immunity. So 100%.
Yeah. Like, if there's one thing that I'm so grateful for coming out of this, is like, it feels like a superpower, that like sort of this, like, and I said it last night I was saying I was nervous for sleeping to talk about sleep. That like bring it on, like, you know, bring it on, sleepless night, whatever, like fear, whatever, you can be here. I'm not going to make you go away. Just, you know, bring it on. And then I slept well. All this paradoxical stuff. But yeah, I love this sort of immunity superpower and applying it in my life. One of my favorite metaphors that my counselor gave me, she said, you know, brains are like an email inbox. And, you know, like for my email inbox on my computer, you know, you get your useful information, and then there's this spam. You always get spam. That's like Nigerian prince wants money, or your Netflix subscription is like, send us your credit card. And you're like, that's a bunch of junk. Like, filter that away. But the exact same mechanism happens in our brain, you know, useful thought, spam. And we get the like, oh, I should send that prince some money. And like, I should like send my credit, right? Like we don't do what we do with our inbox on our computer. We don't do it in our brains. We go into that spam. We go into that story. And I've done that for my whole life. So it's taken a while, but immunity is sort of being able to, you know, spam is not going to stop. It's going to keep coming, but I can filter it, and I can say, you know, you can be here.
That's a super nice one. And just to add to that one for a second, I think it is like when we are in a, let's say, like in a state of wellness, we're fine, we're okay. Like then our brain, it does that sorting out. It's like, it's sort of like, this is an important thought. Let's present that one and really pay attention to that. Okay, this is a random thought, like that we don't need. It kind of automatically does that. But when we're in a state of fear, then it becomes like, maybe now all the information is important. Everything you see around, like everything is important right now. We need to pay attention to everything, which is kind of like, that's what the brain is designed to do. When there's a real threat, that's super helpful. But when it's kind of like this internal threats, is not helpful. And then the sorting out mechanism stops happening, right? And so yeah, again, like just adding on to that analogy.
Totally. That's when I like, I think you say like seeing under the hood, or Alina says like seeing the magic trick, is the brain kept just saying the same stuff to me over and over. And for so long, I'd like, oh yeah, that's the thing. And I was like, what? Stop. Like, I've heard that like 100 times. Like, stop it. And you could start to see the brain became, I think one of the big steps in recovery is, you know, your brain, you see it as like a separate entity, as this sort of like thing that's lobbing weird stuff at you. And you can be like, you know, kind of whatever, cut that out. And it kind of, that's what sort of silences it. New relationship with the brain is a big step. I'll finish up my story here. And thanks for letting me talk through in such detail. I think the last sort of phase and where I'm at today is this sort of the long tail. And Alina and Michelle talk about this sort of recovery tail and the speed bumps. I had sort of clockwork speed bumps almost like every 2 weeks for a while. Every time, again, this funny thing, the brain, like speed bump number 10, my brain's like, this is it. This one's new. It's going to all fall apart. And I'm so wildly grateful for all of Alina's content, but she had this one video, like her recovery is this sort of like, it went down, and then like I slept well for a while, and it's like, it goes crazy again. And I was like, this is it. This is where I, like, mine goes off the rails. And it never did, of course. Not of course, but it never did. Because I think I had the education. But anyways, this long tail, it's still sort of there. And like inch by inch, every day it's sort of improving. And I've sort of just accepted that, this is what it is. Sleep still feels weird. It feels like a weird thing to do now. Like, okay, I'm going to lay down and close my eyes, and I'm going to like go into this trance for hours. Like, it's still this weird activity where I never gave it any thought before. But I'm grateful that I'm sort of at a stage where, I can sort of accept whatever happens. I can say that authentically, where before, you're sort of pushing yourself to think those thoughts of like, I can accept it, but I don't really accept it because this sucks. And I'd say I'm in the phase of experimentation that, I'm confident enough that I'll drink a coffee afternoon, or I'll watch a show, and these micro experiments to kind of push, kind of like you do with public speaking or something. You got to get on stage, or slowly but surely your brain learns. So that's kind of where I am now. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. I'm so glad you found meaningful education, and you're right where you are right now. And maybe I can ask you one quick question, and then we can go to one of your questions. And the one last question I have for you is, you know, have you found things? Have you learned things from this that apply to kind of other areas of life? And if so, some example?
Oh yeah, yeah. We spoke a bit about that. It really did feel like a crash course on mental health, and I think one thing that came out of it, I surprised myself that I'm not one to sort of bug people for help or anything, but I reached out to a lot of people and friends that I knew struggled with one thing or another, and just like incredible connection on a deeper level that I never had before, to have this like deeper empathy. And if I know someone is having a bad time at work, I can sort of like, oh yeah, like that. I want to hear about that in this like genuine way, because I think I can better relate to what struggle and pain and suffering are. So that feels really good to have. And I have these deeper connections now with friends and family. Anxiety, fear. Honestly, like I think 3/4 of me, I know the question of like, if you could go back, would you do insomnia again? And it feels like a funny question, because half of me is like, absolutely not. That was terrible. But half of me is like fascinated and amazed by learning about the brain and the human condition, and the ability to sort of get through suffering. And I did, it seems like cold plunges are all the rage these days, cold water swimming. And I really related it a lot to that, because it's this sort of, cold water can't inherently hurt you, but it's scary to get in. And if you can get in and sort of breathe through it, it gets easier. And I've always been a terrible swimmer in cold water, and now I'm like, I can do this. I can do hard things. And I went in for like a minute in this cold water, and it's like, yes, yeah. It felt really, really good. I could go on. Yeah. So many things I've learned.
No, that's super nice. And I actually had a similar experience. We were, during this last summer, me and my family spent a few months in Valencia, Spain, and we didn't have hot water often. Like, it was just cold, and I don't like that. I like my warm shower. But then,
Yeah.
as I was standing there with the cold water coming down, I was like, what's keeping me from taking a shower is actually mostly fear. I kind of realized that it's mostly like, it's mostly me. I'm scared of feeling cold. And then when I saw that, I was like, okay, it made it a little easier for sure. But anyway, just relating to that. But yeah, I think I'm sensing that you may have several questions. Actually, we should probably do like an episode 2 where you just ask me questions. But
That'd be great.
but maybe you have like one last question from your end.
Yeah, let me scan my questions here. I did sprinkle them in a little bit. Yeah, we did talk about this sort of Western medicine. I mentioned to my doctor, my counselor, like, it really helped me, guys. Like, thanks for all your professional expertise, but what helped me is going on YouTube and watching these YouTube videos. And I could see them being like, what? Like, and like, Alina's Instagram is incredible. And to tell them, like, just go on Instagram, so it doesn't resonate with them. So I think we talked about it already, but what it means to mainstream that information, I don't know the mechanism for that, or if you have grand plans or ideas.
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say that you can nowadays find incredible things, right, on Instagram, TikTok, like YouTube. But there's also a lot of unhelpful things, right, on the very same channel. So I think that may be one reason why people are like, go to Instagram. Like, yes, if you find the right thing on Instagram, it's really helpful, but it can be tricky. But yeah, I say my personal kind of grand plan is not very, very elaborate. It's basically just kind of more of the same, keep creating great content on all the platforms we can reach. I have this project with a film guy in Florida where we're I've filmed a couple episodes where I talk to somebody with insomnia, and we kind of follow his journey over time, over several months. And I'm hopeful that could be like the pilot of like a docu-series that Netflix or Amazon or something like that will pick up, and that could be really big, but otherwise nothing more than that. And but I believe, but I want to add one more thing, which is like, you first found Coach Joseph, right? Joseph Panel, right? And his kind of breakthrough was actually this. He did a CBT-I course, but with somebody her name is Stephanie, who's kind of not your garden variety, like, she's not kind of your, maybe if there's is such a thing as a typical therapist, she's very, very insightful and very, very, very engaged in the learning. So she helped Joseph, right? And then we have a student now in our certification program whose name is Barney. And when I interviewed him, I asked him, like, what made it really different for you? And he was like, oh, it's Joseph panel, right? And now Barney is becoming a coach and helping people,
Wow.
right? So I see it that way too, right? People who've gone through this, they become educators and they educate more and they help people and then they become educators. So that's another way, like in a grassroots way, I think we can really grow.
Absolutely. And we've seen it in our society with like yoga and meditation that, now Headspaces has a Netflix series. I think you're right. It is happening. And that is the way to go about it. And eternally grateful for the content you create. Maybe one more question that's been weighing on me just because I've been speaking with, you talk to more people about sleep. And there seems to be like, our kind of this community of, something triggers this fear and you go through the recovery, but there's also people like my mother-in-law and some friends that are like just bad sleepers. They're like, I just slept bad since I was a teenager, and they don't think much of it. It doesn't seem like they have a fear of sleep, but they're just like, yeah, I don't know, I wake up at 2 and I like read a book or watch TV, and yeah, it sucks. And I want to help those people and be like, oh, I found all this great content, but it doesn't feel like the same thing. They don't have this sort of fear around sleep. Like my mother-in-law is like, oh yeah, I had a bad sleep, toss and turn all night, probably slept 2 hours. And I remember thinking when I was struggling, being like, what, you slept 2 hours and you just don't even really care? And I don't know, do you think, are those two separate categories or is it all one and the same? I want to help them, but I didn't know what to do.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, and I have had this type of question, and I have pondered this a bit in the past. And I think, firstly, that there is a lot of variability in sleep. Like all people have like a choppy night here and there for whatever reason. And so again, if we don't think much about it, it doesn't become a recurring thing, right? But I think also there are some people who kind of identify as a bad sleeper, and it almost becomes a little bit of like their identity. They get to talk about how bad their sleep was, but they're actually not very emotionally engaged with it. Like, and for that person, maybe there isn't so much of a struggle, and maybe they don't want it necessarily to be better, right? Because that is an aspect of their life that is lost in a way, right? And so all I can say about that is like, for somebody who doesn't really identify it as a real problem to be solved, you can't really help them. It has to come from within.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like saying, oh, I'm really bad remembering names. It's like I've accepted, which is totally untrue. Like anyone can learn to be good at remembering names. There's tools you can learn. There's probably YouTube videos on being like an expert name remember, but we sort of label ourselves and accept this as just who we are. So I'm sure, and again, my counselor said, like, we have so much power within to fix and heal ourselves in many number of ways. And I do believe that now. So I think that those people can find ways to at least improve their sleep. But I think they have to like take that initiative. And yeah,
I totally agree with you. And yeah, again, I sense there may be a lot of more questions. So if you're up for it and you have questions, so we should do another episode where you just you ask me questions.
Here. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, we didn't even get into a bunch of
really
fear is this rabbit hole topic that I would love to talk more about.
Well, then we have it. Like everybody heard me. We have witnesses. Brady committed to a second episode.
All right, you got it, Daniel. Anything I can do, you guys have helped me so much. So any fraction I can give back, let me know.
Anytime.
Yeah. Was thanks so much.
Nice. Super nice having you here, Brady, and we'll connect again.
Likewise. All right. Have a good one, Daniel. Thanks so much. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Hi, it's me, Coach Daniel, and I hope you are feeling excited right now because you're so close to the finish line of Insomnia. And if you found that aha moment you've been looking for in this video, please share it with the world. Because insomnia can be such a lonely and isolating place before you find our community. Speaking of which, if you would like some more personalized support on your journey, then head over to thesleepcoachschool.com. We have free and paid courses available with certified sleep coaches who have seen the worst of insomnia, left the struggle, and now are ready to help you. If you decide to join, we look forward to seeing you on the other side.